Well, hello, Canadian Campaholic here with a little bit of an advice video for pop-up camper owners. One of my subscribers, Leila G, had written up a series of questions in a comment on one of my recent videos. The questions surrounded mostly safety concerns with a Jayco 2013 pop-up that they own. And while I have not owned a Jayco pop-up, and I'm certainly not an expert on Jayco products, the questions being asked do lead to some other areas of advice that I wanted to share with you guys today. So the question surrounded a Jayco J-Series 1007 pop-up camper made in around 2013. My understanding is that there was a recall done on some Jayco models from that year. In fact, I've actually pulled up the recall notice online here. And it stated that Jayco was recalling certain 2011 and 2013 J-Series campers equipped with a Lippert power roof lift mechanism. So on our Palomino, it was a manual crank, but on some of the newer pop-up campers, there's actually an electric mechanism that will raise the roof for you. Great idea. In this case, though, it states that the manual override feature may, emphasis on the word may, be misused, potentially resulting in torque from the drive motor damaging the lift mechanism. So with any kind of power tongue jack, power roof lifting mechanism, there's usually a manual override, because if you lose battery power, you need to still be able to use that piece of equipment. On our travel trailer, we have a power tongue jack. If the battery's flat, I still want to be able to raise and lower the tongue of the trailer, so there is a crank I can insert where I can manually crank it. What they're saying is if the owner of said trailer misuses it, I'm not sure exactly what that would be, they can cause damage to the lift mechanism. It also goes on to say that that could cause the roof to fall unexpectedly. That could be very serious. If you're in the trailer sleeping, well, it doesn't matter what you're doing in the trailer, if that roof falls, that could cause some very, very serious injuries, because those roofs are quite heavy on pop-up campers, and that could be very, very dangerous. Now, what I find interesting about the recall, it says that Jayco will notify owners and provide a warning label to instruct them of the proper use of the manual override feature. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an RV expert, so none of the advice I'm giving you here constitutes as professional advice, but in my humble opinion, if I was to buy a Jayco pop-up that had this warning, I would be concerned, but it wouldn't prevent me from buying the camper completely, because on any camper, even one that has a manual lift system, there is a braking system on the crank that is designed to prevent the roof from freewheeling down and collapsing. But it's never, ever, ever foolproof. We owned a 1999 Palomino Yearling with the Goshen lift system, one of the best lift systems ever devised, but there was always a risk with those lift systems that eventually, over time, something could wear out on the crank mechanism and the roof could fall. So what Palomino and a lot of other manufacturers, part of Forest River and others do, is they provide brackets that you actually put over the lifter posts as a security measure. And some people mock that and say, oh, well, you know, if the lift system worked perfectly, you wouldn't need them. But it's absolutely essential. So the way it would work, I'm using some very crude implements, but let's say that this crowbar was the lift post. In the four corners of the trailer, it lifts and extends and the roof, you know, sits on top. The brackets would, it would be a three-sided metal bracket, and it basically, I realize this is not three-sided, but it basically goes around the lift post, and it's solid. Lift posts usually are in segments, and as it collapses, each segment collapses into the one below it, and so on. The bracket, the metal safety bracket, if you will, and it's just thin metal, three-sided, is there so the roof cannot, under any circumstances, slide down. It basically butts in between the roof of the pop-up and then the actual box at the bottom of the pop-up. So once the trailer roof is lifted, you basically push these brackets on. You only need them on two corners. Do one on the front corner and then diagonally opposite on the other corner. And the idea behind it is, if you put them like that, one in each corner, opposite each other, diagonally across the trailer, that if the roof was to suddenly fall, the brackets would support it. They work. I know this because I've tried to lower my pop-up roof and forgot to take out a bracket, and the whole roof was basically hanging off of the one bracket. Now, Leela, in her post on my channel, did state that she ordered brackets from the manufacturer, but they didn't exactly fit. If you know anybody that can get their hands on some kind of sheet metal and maybe has a vise, like a bench top vise, if you measure it and cut that sheet metal and bend it, that probably would suffice. I've seen some people put wood between the roof and the box of the trailer, but there's always a risk that that's going to pop out and come loose. So I don't know that's necessarily the best idea. I guess what I'm trying to say here is that whether there's a recall on the lift system or not, there's always an inherent risk that the roof could come down. And so I would recommend, yes, definitely get some sort of brackets on there. But realistically, the recall is saying if the manual override was misused. So I'm not sure who you bought your pop-up camper from, but if they didn't have reason to use the manual override, you're probably okay. Really, the manual override is there as a worst-case scenario backup for when your battery dies. It's not something you should be using on a regular basis. The other question that she had in her comments was she has some fears that the arms that hold the beds, so when you slide out your beds in the pop-up, you slide out the bunks, most brands, if not all of them, will have support poles that go underneath. Some you actually put into brackets up under the beds and then you attach it to the frame of the trailer. Others have ones that are bolted on that you swing down and put into place. In terms of those breaking, I would be willing to bet they're not going to break. If you have a king-size bed and you have two full-grown adults, as long as you're not exceeding, let's say, 600 or 700 pounds, and again, that's a ballpark estimate, I really don't see that you're going to break those poles. The amount of force it would take to snap them is immense, and in most cases, your concern is not about the poles breaking or even the bunk ends breaking. Our old pop-up camper, the gentleman that owned it replaced the bunks with the OSB, or Oriented Strand Board, and I was a little nervous with that because it's a little flexible. It never broke, and trust me, we definitely pushed that weight limit by having two adults and even in some cases two kids on there as well. You don't want to overload it. The risk, though, with a pop-up camper, let's say that this box is the box of your camper. So you've got your steel chassis underneath, you've got this wooden framed, or in some cases aluminum framed box underneath, especially if it's wooden framed. This is a greater risk. I'm not sure with the Jaycos if they're wood frame construction or aluminum, but if you imagine this is the pop-up camper, and these little flaps, let's say, are the bunk ends, and you've got poles coming down here from the bunk to the frame of the trailer. All of the weight that you put on here is levering the front of the trailer. See how that's flexing like that? One of the things I noticed in our old pop-up camper was that when it was fully set up, if folks were sleeping in both bunks, both sides of the trailer were actually pulling and flexing out a little bit. Now, the frame wasn't flexing, steel chassis, but the wooden box that's bolted to it was. And in some cases, I actually noticed if you looked around the door of the trailer, you could see more of a gap. And when I researched it on the pop-up portal, somebody had said that yes, that leverage, or leverage, potato, potato, that pulls down on the sides can actually cause the whole box of the trailer to flex a little bit. We actually had that come to a head for us one night, late one night in the fall. My wife and I were sleeping on the queen-size bed at the front of the camper, and all of a sudden in the middle of the night there was a very loud bang. And the bang actually was, I'll demonstrate it with the box, right here. It separated, just like that. Just like that. The wooden screws, or the screws rather, that were holding the wood together actually came apart, and the front of the trailer pulled forward. Thank goodness it didn't completely collapse. There was enough rigidity in the rest of the structure that we were in place. Because if you think about it, if that had completely failed, the whole front of the trailer would have caved in. It would have ripped the canvas out of the roof, and we would have had a nasty tumble to the ground. But it actually separated. And the reason for that is that our trailer was a 1999. Layla's trailer, if I'm understanding this correctly, is a 2013, maybe aluminum frame construction, so we'll see. But that had had nearly 16 years of use. 16 years of kids jumping up and down on the bed and parents laying on the bed, and over time it broke. So we basically had to go to a hardware store. We bought a drill, we bought a bunch of screws, we bought wood glue, Gorilla wood glue, brackets. We basically pushed everything back together. We had to slide the bunk in, pushed everything back together. We put glue along the wood where it is separated, and I ran 2 or 3 inch wood screws through the front of the trailer to clamp and pull everything back together. And then on the inside of the trailer, I put some L brackets to reinforce it. And if anything, that corner of the trailer was probably stronger than it had ever been. What was shocking was when Palomino built it, they used a couple of very small wood screws, no adhesive, and then around the top of the box of the trailer, they had just used a little bit of a very thin aluminum, almost like a skin, to just kind of hold everything together. So to answer your question, Leila, is there a chance the poles are going to snap or break? Not likely. Is there a chance that the bunks themselves would break? Well, unless the wood's rotten, it would take a tremendous amount of force for them to break. You have far more of a chance of damage from the flex of the box of the trailer than you have of the concerns you have there. Again, I have to point out the trailer's 2013. That's not that old for pop-up campers, so likely you would be absolutely fine. So again, in summary, brackets of some sort to hold the roof up, that is an absolute must. Even if you got to take some rough measurements, get a couple of pieces of sheet metal that's fairly thick, bend it into shape so that you just have something as a security measure so that if the roof drops, it can't drop all the way. That's absolutely fine. And just keep an eye on the flex on the trailer, just in case that becomes an issue. The last question that Leila had is relating to bike carriers. I don't have a lot of experience with bike carriers, especially not on pop-up campers. The issue with bike carriers, whether it's a fifth wheel, whether it's a travel trailer or a pop-up camper, is that sometimes those bumpers on the back, they're not meant to hold any weight. And talking about leverage, if you put a bike carrier on it, I've seen instances where it actually ripped the bumper right off. On my brand new travel trailer, there's actually a label that says if you try to put a bike carrier on the back of it, you will void the chassis warranty. So I would be cautious of that. One thing I have seen as a great alternative is to actually install a roof rack on the actual trailer itself, like a bike rack on the roof. So the bikes will actually ride on the top of the trailer versus hanging off the back. The only caveat with that is anytime you start mounting anything and bolting it to the roof, you're creating holes in the roof and you could risk water ingress. If you have a roof-mounted air conditioner, that's going to be a little bit of a challenge. So I'm not saying don't use a bike rack of any kind. I'm simply saying that I don't always really recommend them for bumpers. If you're going to put them on the roof, be careful when you install it. Maybe have a professional do it and make sure that that roof is very well sealed with lap sealant to stop any leaks. So anyway, that was a very non-technical bit of advice, but I hope that was helpful and provided some insight. If you haven't already done so, please do subscribe to my channel and give this video a thumbs up. Happy camping. We'll talk to you later.